Okay, folks, thank you for attending this session on reverse acceleration. Interesting title. If you can see me and all see the screen okay? Yeah. I can't hear you, so you probably need to respond in that. That's brilliant. Okay. Fantastic. We just got somebody else joined. Welcome, Rick. Okay, so a quick introduction of myself. So who am I? So my name is Ian Balderson. I'll tell you a little bit about my background and a little bit about where we started and where we've come through to form effectively the process that we form. So my background, if you're all looking at discussions around technology, is not. So my background predominantly is 30 years in Barclays. Most of that time I spent in the retail and business sectors. Most recently, I guess, from 2011 to 2017, I ran Manchester and Salford area, and in charge of all the branch network, small business, etc. around there. And I guess that's where my passion and my link with getting involved in technology and how technology can actually really start to act as a true enabler to move organizations and companies forward. So I ran the largest group of branches in the UK, larger even than the groups of branches that sat around London. And I had the, I guess, great privilege of being really close by Barclays Technology Centre, which was based in Knutsford. And I worked very closely with the Technology Centre, huge place, largest technology centre of any organisation that sits outside of London, employs 3,500 people, full of project managers, full of techie guys. And I guess that's where my first links start. And those links were when Barclays was going through its digital transformation programme, and how we would engage as an organisation in a different way with the public, with its customers. So back at the start of that, back in 2011, it was the launch of certain mobile apps that Barclays was coming out with, such as Ping It. Some of you may have heard of it, you may not have done, and how customers can start to do their banking in a different way using mobile technology. Online, of course, have been out for a while. And I became a guru, effectively, of a test bed market. So anything new that Barclays was bringing out, they would bring in my direction first. I would test it. I'd test it through my staff. I would test it through my customers. And it became very apparent the sort of things that we need to be thinking about as an organisation. So any technology that people actually come out with is only as good as the people that are actually using it. So what we discovered very, very early doors was you can throw as many apps out there for staff to talk to their customers over, but if they didn't understand the technology themselves, then effectively it's never going to get communicated effectively. So what did that become? So many of you may have heard of the Digital Eagle programme that Barclays launched. There's been adverts on TV, it's all over social media, the different bits that they did and are still doing. That was actually born from the work that we were doing here in Manchester and the work that I was doing out of my branches. And the original Digital Eagle programme was designed to upskill and develop staff, colleagues of Barclays, right across the organisation in generic digital technology. And the reason for that is if the colleagues and the staff actually understood digital technology, then they could actually share that and experience it and demonstrate it with their customers. So the whole start of that iPad usage in banking halls, code playgrounds being given to kids in branches and in different environments, that all started with the work that I was doing effectively in Manchester. And then latterly in 2017, I moved across into strategic transformation, which I did a UK role, which was working with large corporate customers of Barclays and actually helping them to go through that same journey that Barclays had gone through in terms of their colleague engagement, in terms of their colleague upskills. So it's really working very closely with corporate boards of big PLC companies to go through their digital strategy and actually how that worked, and how that worked and engaged with their colleagues, with their own members of staff, and also how it works to help and engage with their customers. During that journey, for those that have heard of it, I worked and I was based in the Barclays Eagle Lab that was in the Landing in Media City, which is when I came across Paul, who was the managing director for the Landing in Media City. And we started collaborating quite closely around what we were experiencing and what we were finding over that whole engagement of small startup entrepreneur businesses with large corporate organizations, and actually how difficult that is to get the two together. And this is where the idea of our model, Project 808, which I'll talk about in a few slides' time, as to where we came up with the idea of what we do. And we'll talk a little bit about the successes and why it is successful, but ultimately based on our own experiences. From Paul's side, working with entrepreneurs within the Landing, from my side, working with the corporates, that all of these startup businesses, which I'm sure many of you will want to become, how do you actually engage with those larger organizations? Okay, so I want to start by telling you a little bit of story. Some of you may have already heard this, and I'm sure that you actually have. A story about the NASA pen. Is it a truth, or is it true, or is it a myth? Well, the bottom line is it doesn't really matter. The story goes back to the late 50s, where there was a real battle for dominance and progression in space travel. And that ultimately was between NASA and Russia, and who was going to win the race, and who was actually going to dominate within that space. Now, we all know what happened, but I want to tell you the story about the pen. So the NASA pen started to be created because of a problem that NASA was experiencing in terms of recording data. Everything that actually was seen in space had to be recorded, whether it's data to do with the spacecraft itself, to do with the people, to do with what they were discovering, to do with what they were finding. Everything was recorded. And of course, back then, personal computers didn't exist in the same way they do now. There was no handheld tablets that people could utilize in the late 50s. So everything had to be recorded on pen and paper. So what was the problem? Well, the reality is that in a zero gravity environment, pens just simply do not work. The ink just would not transfer onto the paper at all. So NASA started to look at investing into the research and the discovery of how they could solve this problem. They worked with a private organization. You can Google this, and there's lots and lots of different theories as to what the reality of this story is. But as the story goes, as the myth or true story goes, is that they invested the equivalent of up to £11 million in creating a pen through a private company in order to solve this particular problem. So they did it. The pen was created. Brilliant stuff. NASA had solved the problem of how to put ink on paper. What did the cosmonauts do over in Russia? They simply used a pencil. So why am I telling you this story? What's the point? Like many of things, the solutions that are out there, we always start with a problem. So NASA started with a problem that ink would not transfer onto paper. So started investing and looking at a way that they could actually solve this problem. What Russia actually did was look to see what already existed out there in the market. There was already a solution, and that solution was simply a pencil. Now, you can go away and Google that. It's quite a commonly well-known story. The principle of it is sometimes a great idea that people come out with, there is actually already something else out there that exists. Now, in our world, we get a lot of what we call the beauty parade. So what do I mean by the beauty parade? a lot of people come up with some great ideas. There are millions and millions and millions of ideas out there that are patented, that people have already put the IP out on. Many of these ideas come from people's personal experiences. I'm working and sort of mentoring a guy from another university, actually, who has come out with a great idea. A student, like just graduating, actually, probably similar to yourselves, where it is an idea based on his problem with actually finding a property to rent while he was at university. So he's come up with almost like a Tinder profile scenario, which is where it finds a property for you, and then it also ties you in with potential people that could be house shows with you also. There's loads of ideas out there, loads of different things that people come up with that actually is all based around people's personal experiences. Now, during my time in Barclays and working with a lot of entrepreneurs, I met some great ideas, great people, great ideas, real different thinkers. The real challenge was when I put those people in front of corporate organizations. The corporate organizations absolutely loved it, but did they really truly have a need for the people that they were actually seeing, for the different entrepreneurs that were actually presenting to them? And I guess ultimately the reason why we call it a beauty parade is very often it's a show and tell. So what actually happens when people come through with an idea? What process do they have to go through? And this is where we look at, I guess, a traditional acceleration model. So how does that start? I've got an idea. I've got an idea for a product. I've got an idea for a new development, whatever that is. How does that actually materialize into becoming a genuine product at the end of it? And you can walk around Manchester, any city, any workspace, anywhere in the UK, anywhere in Europe, and you will come across businesses that are coming up with these ideas and going through this current process. So how does it work? It starts with the idea, and then you've got to actually sort of build it. So how do you go through that process as it currently stands at the moment? Well, most people need some form of investment in order to get that program started. How easy is that to convince an investor that actually your idea is going to work? Your idea is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread was invented. Very, very difficult. Most investors out there, even though there is a lot of investment going into businesses, very, very, very few take the risk of actually utilizing a startup and utilizing a startup idea. Why? Because they don't need to. They're making plenty of money. All of these VC companies are making huge amounts of money investing in a company that is already established, rather than taking that big risk that might work, it might not work. So we see, and I go through that journey for acceleration, traditional acceleration, and you've got the idea, you hit the first stumbling block of, do I get investment and can I take it to a proof of concept? Loads and loads of these companies that come up with these ideas stop at that point because the investment funds simply are not available. For those that are available, brilliant. They've actually got it and they've taken it to a proof of concept. Superb, well done. What happens next? Through the acceleration process, that then needs to be taken to market. And that has two stages to the journey. And what actually happens there? Further investment is generally needed. What you will commonly see as being a second seed investment. And that's in order to take it to an MVP process so it is ready to go out to the market. Many fail at this point. Many fail with the second seed investments. And why? The big problem is the customer audience that they have at the end of it. You've come up with an idea, but who are your customers going to be at the end of that idea? Is it for a specific single market? Is it for a wider audience? Is the product actually scalable? Is it something that can be taken across into several other industries? And this is where I'll talk a little bit now about what we do and why we're doing it. Okay. So reverse acceleration, if you Googled it, Trust me, I have. But I think it's a great term. We sort of made it up. The reverse incubator does exist. Reverse accelerator does work. But if you Google it, you'll get loads of different stuff that comes out about moving backwards in a car, reversing, all of that sort of jazz. The reality is that the problem that all of these startup companies generally fail with, and it is something like a 96% failure, you do of course get some of the really successful ones, is that actually getting it out to the market in the end is very, very difficult. So we do it differently, and this is the reason why it's called reverse acceleration. So we start with the end in mind. So before we actually do anything, we always go to the potential audience and the potential customer first. And this is the bit that I actually do. So I would start with the customer. I'm going to talk to you about a piece of work that I'm actually doing with the pharmacy sector right now. So how that came about was looking at a set of problems that actually exist within the pharmacy world. Many, many problems. Too big a list to actually go through. But it's all about actually deeply understanding the problem that an organization or a group of organizations actually face, and indeed the whole of the industry actually faces, rather than focusing all around the solution. Because if you're selling something to actually get around a problem that a sector or an industry faces, rather than building a product and going, I've got this will actually help you within this world. So really understanding the challenges and the problems, and I guess all of the things really that makes that industry, whatever it is, really, really difficult on a day-to-day basis. If you could solve that problem for them, ultimately, would they buy it? If you could solve the problem, would they actually take it away and buy it at the end? So we start with the customer, and we start with understanding exactly the pain barriers that they are going through. And then we confirm it back with them, and then we start to build the solution. Now we do that in a unique way. We utilize various things such as think tanks of expertise, academia. We use think tanks of engineers. We use think tanks of techies. I myself am not a super duper techie person. What I am really, really good at is understanding building relationships with customers. Paul, my business partner, he's certainly more on the techie side that I am. But it is that link, and this is where we've got it really, really unique. It's that link between the customer, the person who is going to buy the product at the end, and then in turn linking the solution to that customer. What that then means is that you've got a product at the end that you know is already going to be bought before you've even built it. And not only do you know it's going to be bought by that sector, it's potentially scalable. It's not just one customer that is going to buy it. The pharmacy sector in itself, there's 11,500 of them out there just in the UK. It's also got the ability to be able to be tweaked to potentially be used within the NHS, into dentistry, into veterinary. So you're starting to build a product that has got a ready-made audience, and it's also potentially got a spin-off opportunity to go elsewhere. So I mentioned earlier around traditional acceleration, and the bit that's really, really sad in terms of how many times do things actually fall down? Well, they fall down through lack of funding. What it actually does, if you've already got that client base that's there at the end, because you've started with them, they've already told you before you've actually built the product that they will buy it and they will utilize it. That process makes it very, very interesting for investment opportunities. And we do not have a problem in obtaining investment opportunities. Why? The risk is minimal. The risk is minimal because they already know that there's going to be clients out there. And effectively, guys, that is reverse acceleration. It's quite a quick talk. I'm hoping that some people will ask some questions. I don't know whether some people have put some on there. I was trying to have a look at the chat as I'm going through. But reverse acceleration ultimately is starting with the end in mind. So, any questions from anybody? Try to have a look. Okay, no questions from anybody? Yeah, absolutely. So many, to be fair. Would you like me to go into a little bit more detail over some of the stuff that we're doing right now? Okay, that's cool. So I'll talk about our process and exactly how we do it. So and I'll talk about the work that I've done with the pharmacy sector. So the pharmacy sector one was really interesting. It actually began with me going out with, I got approached a bit like the beauty parade stuff that I mentioned earlier, and I got approached to have a look at the capability of using robotics in the pharmacy sector, which actually is already out there. So some pharmacies are already utilising robotics, and how they use that is it is a physical robot. It's there to support and help with dispensing of drugs within the pharmacy area. So rather than an individual going and grabbing stuff off shelves and making up a prescription, it's a physical robot. You load the machine with all the medicines, and a robot picks up each of the bits that are needed every time a patient walks in. So I went out to have a look at these machines, went out to the manufacturers, and this is the bit over really understanding and getting under the hood of exactly what the problem is. And I looked at it, and these machines they're very expensive. They cost around 70,000, which is very expensive for an independent pharmacy to actually start looking at. And sort of in the background of this, there's this ready awareness that the market is dominated predominantly at the moment by 4 major players. So Boots, Well, Lloyd's, Cohen, they're sort of the big players along with the supermarkets. But pending and coming around the corner, Amazon are about to launch the pharmacy sector. So I sort of walked away from the process and spoke to my pharmacy connection and said, right, okay, actually what we need to do is we need to understand exactly what goes on in a pharmacy world. So that process and how that worked for me is I literally spent 2 months working with a dozen pharmacy owners around in different parts of the area that were in different size sectors. So some had multiple shops, some were one-man bands, some had an online business, and it was really just questioning, observing, going out and finding out what the day-to-day world looks like. And this is actually a really, really interesting point when you say, how does this work? If you go to a business and say, what are your problems? You're likely to get a blank face and people don't understand it. Whereas if you go into a business and just it could be starting it off by asking the question of what really annoys you about your role, what really annoys you about your business. What, if you had a magic wand, what would you want to change? What would you like to do better? So some of it is simply about questioning and working with these guys. Some of it was about very much observing and almost shadowing what they do on a day-to-day basis. So I spent 2 months literally going through that process, and that's how we do it with each of the businesses that we work with. Is we'll spend time with them, we'll shadow them, I will, and effectively get under the hood of what's really, really going on in the business. The outspin of that is the creation of an innovation lab. So the innovation lab is designed to collectively put together all of those problems and actually come out with solutions. So right now we're in the process, well, we have started building 4 different solutions for the pharmacy sector that we already have a ready-made client base for. So not just the clients that we are working with. One of the other real important bits that we had to get right around this is we know pharmacy owners, but we don't know all 11,500 of them. So how do we actually get access to the rest of those 11,500? So our advisory board for the Pharmacy Innovation Lab is made up of members of organisations that look after pharmacies right across the UK. And the reason why we did that was absolutely to gain access to the whole of that market. So we're pretty much up to proof of concept level for them. And we're going through second stage investment seed funding, which ultimately is a very easy process. And what we found, which is really, really interesting, is the investors, it's going through crowdfunding, are predominantly made up by the industry themselves. So it's actually pharmacy owners that are investing into the lab because they know that the rest of the sector are actually going to buy it at the end. So yeah, really interesting journey. So that's one that we're dealing with. That will then move on. It doesn't finish at the end. That innovation lab now will function for the next few years and continue to become, I guess, self-fulfilling, if you like, as the income starts to come in through the sales of the product.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Rick. Yes, I can now. Yes.
Right. I'll put me. I didn't realise. I thought this is just a one-way. I'll put my camera. No, that's really interesting, Ian. Thanks for sharing all that. So, I mean, I was just sort of interested to know what. I mean, so the IP is owned by the.
Oh, you broke up then. Were you about to say the IP is owned by the lab?
I just wondering. Yeah, I'm just wondering how that it all works. Is the IP owned by your company or by the lab and or by the investors, or? So
how we do it is, it may sound complicated. Let me try and whiz through it so I can explain. So Project 828, which is us, so we own a chunk of the lab. The rest of the lab is owned by pharmacy owner investors that have come into it. So initially, the IP is owned by the Innovation Lab, of which we own part of that lab. What then actually happens is each solution is then a separate startup business. So we utilize different developers depending on what the solution is. So some of the solutions are hardware based, some of them are software based. So each one is a different startup business. We then transfer the IP into that startup business for each of those solutions. And the reason why we do that is because that is the only way that each of those individual startup businesses can then gain funding. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah.
So it sounds like a complicated process, but it actually it's quite straightforward. And we probably took a good year to build that program. And actually find the right way as to how we do it based on experience and failure ultimately. So we experienced that failure piece over similar to a standard traditional accelerator, that actually getting funding is really, really difficult. Once we started to reverse it, that's when we found that the process was far simpler and actually far more attractive for investors that are out there. And actually, what we found now is we get investors approaching us about new stuff. What are you working on next? What are you working on next? Which is great. So to the point over, you know, we may well look at our own investment funds moving forward.
Very good. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Please feel free to speak, because actually, thank you, Rick, because it's like really difficult just staring at a screen with with nobody coming back.
Yeah. I know.
But that's life at the moment, right? That is the way things are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's been quite difficult, hasn't it? I mean, I do a bit of teaching myself, so I know what it's like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I bet. Yeah. Spend our life on Zoom and various different programs.
Yeah.
So, any other questions from anybody else? So, okay, well, I guess I'll end it then with my advice to everybody is, if you are looking at a startup business, the key to it is start with the end in mind, rather than an idea or a solution. There's actually nothing wrong with having the idea or the solution ready in your own mind, but don't set it up until you've engaged with the audience that is potentially going to be your market to be selling with. That is a critical piece that we've learned, and we learned the hard way. But actually just tweaking it, turning it on its head, reversing it in our language, that's the bit that's made the real difference for us. Okay, Elizabeth, if you're still there, I don't think there's any more questions coming through.
Yeah, I'm still here. So if you don't have any questions, we can end the session here.
Okay. End session where?
Yes, and we will send down email with the record of the session to you through the email that you sent it. You registered with us earlier. Thank you everyone to join us today with Dr. Ian Balderson, and thank you for your time and support today.
No problem at all. Okay, bye for now. Bye-bye.